Am I right?
We did it.
Okay. So I call to order the September 12th meeting of PZC Regulatory Review Committee. Members present are Tomeko, Witch, Corsi, and Aho. We have minutes from August 8th.
And Ward.
And Ward. Oh, Ward's here. Oh, yes. Hi, Vera. You at home? Yeah, okay. You can hear us? Good, good. Okay, and Ward is here. We have minutes from August 8th.
Which makes a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Okay, moved by Witch,
I'll second.
second
Ward.
by Ward. Any discussion?
I'm disqualified.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, passes unanimously. So we can move on to high density housing. We need to get some feedback, right?
Yeah,
From the folk.
we do. So, let's see, we discussed, this with Tyke, at our last a couple weeks ago, and Mike had sort of drafted just a sort of an idea of what we could do for a special meeting. And just as you all recall, we are going through a number of different planning initiatives in Mansfield. We've got the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the Facilities Master Plan, and the Northwest Mansfield Vision and Strategy Plan. So we're working closely with FHI to do a lot of outreach regarding the Northwest Mansfield Plan. And that is happening towards the end of, well, ASAP. We'll be convening some focus groups, individual interviews, and then we'll be having a community meeting during the week of most likely November 9th. So we're getting that, all of those ducks in a row. And so much of what I think FHI is going to hear in the Northwest area is going to, I think it's going to relate to multifamily housing, high density housing. And I think that whatever we get from that, that community outreach should be used to kind of inform what we do for zoning. So I think the way we talked about it, Mike, this is the first time we're kind of bringing this to Mike D'Amato, but the way we talked about it was that this is going to be just one component of the Northwest Plan, but that information, we need to assure the people as they talk about that that's also going to inform the zoning. So I think it makes sense for us to have this special meeting after we do that community outreach.
Right.
So, but I really like what Mike, we discussed this as a staff group, and I like what Mike put down, but I think we wanted to bring this to you to see what you thought. This would really be not necessarily a public forum at this point. That doesn't mean that we can't do a public forum, but it would be a meeting with different boards and committees and staff that really have an informed opinion about this stuff. And then eventually you are going to have to go out to the full public. Either you could do that you'll have to have a public hearing, obviously, but you could also have a community forum in addition to that as well. So like maybe you have Mike D'Amato can kind of help us figure that out. But did I summarize that, Mike D'Amato?
Yeah, I think so. I think the goal here, we may have talked about in previous meetings, is to tee up a bit of a funnel. We don't want to just have a wide open public meeting, because even though all of that feedback is important, what we're trying to do is figure out how we want to move the needle on the regulations we currently have. And that is a bit more of a technical discussion than just tell us what you think about housing. And so the goal with this document that you have is to set up a conversation with some of those informed stakeholder groups that may be involved in these projects in review, or have very specific sort of predefined perspectives, economic development or conservation, open space, whatever, that can provide more concise feedback to help us really get a sense of what we might want to change, so that when we do go to a more broad public hearing that the public will obviously have the opportunity to participate in, or hopefully much closer to what we expect their comments to be. So we're trying to not make it seem as if we're having a bunch of unrelated public meetings that we're asking the public to attend, regarding a bunch of somewhat overlapping topics. And I think that because these, some of these organizations are involved in these developments, it's important to get their feedback. And so these guiding questions were just sort of designed to help move the conversation and leave us with feedback that's actionable.
Now, is this discussion exclusively for high density housing, or can it also include higher density housing?
I think that it would be, at least the way that it was kind of discussed previously, would be talking about any project that meets the current definition of the moratorium, which is not super high density when you talk about on a global scale, but it may be here. So that could be
It's over 3 units per acre, right? Is that what we said?
I think that's where we ended up.
That's,
So
yeah,
Yeah, so you
So
got,
that's pretty low density.
an acre is 40,000, right?
Mhm.
So,
yeah, let's.
so we could include in this discussion 10,000 square foot lots, right?
Yes. Based on like, I believe so.
Well, provided we should know what this moratorium says. I should know that by heart, but.
I should too.
I feel better than that.
I'm gonna just pull that up because, yeah, it's, okay, so.
There's also a unit count that we included.
Yeah, it was, okay, new developments in excess of 5 total units with an average density greater than 3 units per acre shall be prohibited. So it's 5 units total, more than 3 units per acre. So,
Yeah,
so that, I
So-
mean,
so
that's
5 or 10,000 foot lots would be included in this.
right.
So I wonder if we could fiddle with the title of this, because when people think high density, they think those 5-story
Right.
apartments, and that's not the only thing. And that's maybe we don't want a lot of those. And so how can we broaden discussion in the title itself? I would suggest higher density housing discussion.
You could also do high density / small lot, single family.
Yeah, that would make it even more closer to what I want to discuss in addition to high density. Could be high density / small lot.
So I guess a question that I would have is just do you all agree that to the approach that we have here, which is trying to solicit feedback from, agency boards, commissions, et cetera, is a good approach, rather than just sort of creating. Okay.
Yeah.
Because when I wrote this up, and this is like what we put together while we were chatting in our meeting 2 weeks ago, I was thinking that this would be focused solely on projects with a minimum of 5 units. So not specific to density. If we want to do that and make it, I think I'd want to revise this a little bit to make it clear that we're talking about all of that together, because I think that some of these questions, the way they're set up, sort of is leading the discussion to what we think of as far as housing projects, apartments, that type of thing, not necessarily small lot, single family.
Yeah, I think we can discuss both, right? As long as we're discussing the topic of density.
I mean, we can discuss anything.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, can we get feedback? Do we structure it properly so we get the right feedback and we don't have, we don't get overwhelmed with whatever that discussion will ultimately contain. So
Right.
we
Could we call it middle housing, multifamily and middle housing? And then define it from there, like what is, like show a picture of what I don't know, multifamily can be, middle housing can be multifamily as well. So
Does middle housing include small lot?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. It's just that small lot defines it. Some people don't know what middle housing is. Whereas small lot, single family housing, people know immediately what that means.
I agree.
And at least from my point of view, I think there's some places in town where we should encourage small lot, single family houses instead of high density.
yeah, I think so too.
And I-
Well, that is higher
Yeah.
density.
Yep, very speaking.
How about Vera?
I said amen to that.
All right, all right.
I mean, I wanted to ask Mike D'Amato whether whether he thinks that the developments that are in the hopper or we know are coming up or are probably waiting for the moratorium all up and down that small section on 44, is that overkill? And if it is, which it seems to me it is, can we not scale back the density in general? And not give bonuses, density bonuses and just scale it back some?
Yeah,
Or
I
am
think,
I off base about the need? I don't see the need. I think they may fill them up originally, but I think I just don't know how that's gonna play out, but.
well, I think that's what we're trying to hear, right? We can do whatever we want. We can say no more multifamily. I mean, there's many towns in Connecticut have said we don't allow multifamily housing, right? But I think what we need to figure out is what is appropriate. And I do think, I have some ideas also along those lines that I think, we're seeing from just what I hear during these public hearings, that, when you're adjacent to a single family neighborhood, there should be like a scaling down is what we've kind of heard, right?
Yes.
We've heard that we probably want to see more developments with interior green space as well as these buffers, right? Because if you're a family and you want to move to a place, you probably want like a small yard. So there's we want to see the ability to allow for more affordable housing, and with our fee and lieu, we need to look at that. So there's a couple things happening. We have to hear from the community,
Yeah.
and then we have to the devil will be in the details as to, what that all looks like.
And it's too bad that we can't require condos instead of rentals. I've been doing some research on that. We can only zone for use, not for ownership.
Correct, but you can zone for form, and you can zone so that someday there may be a market for condos. For some reason, there's not a market.
The tax laws favor the rental from the point of view of the investor.
Right. I don't know
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
it seems that would be the case since that's all we're getting. But
Yeah.
at some point, we can make it look like a condo, and then we don't care if it's rented or not. I mean, ideally, we don't want to lose that owner occupied rental balance. Mike D'Amato probably knows what that about. I mean, in planning literature, there is this kind of percentage is where you want to have that owner occupied rental balance, and I don't know.
Now, we can say that like an auxiliary unit has to be in a place with an owner. So
We do say that.
So we kind of why can't we zone for condos?
Yeah, well, I think what I'm saying is that you can say it has to look like what we think of a condo.
But we can't say that they have to sell it to individuals.
right, yeah, a condo is just the ownership type, and you'd need to further require that if they did do it as a condo, that there were restrictions within their condo deck that said they couldn't sublease, because then I could just buy the condo and I could rent it out. But you regulate the use of land, not the user of the land.
Right. Yep.
So
Vera, yeah, go ahead.
Just a comment, you're talking about throwing it out and the importance of throwing it out to the community. Don't you know what you're going to get back? I mean, can't you tell who's going to show up and say, for God's sake, stop? I mean, isn't that what the community is going to say?
Yes, yeah.
That is what at least 20 people in the community will say. But Mansfield is a town of 26,000 people, over half of whom are students. So any reasoned consideration of what kind of housing we need has to invite a full breadth of people, including those who aren't currently aggrieved.
I think that with an understanding that there is a general consensus, not a town-wide, we are all in agreement, but there's a clear feeling of uncomfortableness with some of the developments that the town has seen, was sort of why we talked about having the listening session with those focused boards and commissions, because we are entering this whole discussion having adopted a moratorium because we already understand that people aren't happy with what has been proposed. We're not endeavoring to go through this process because we like amending the regulations or because people are so happy with what they've seen, we want to pat ourselves on the back. We're going through this because we want to make it better. And so we've heard that initial feedback and this is the response. And so we're sort of starting this at step 2 as we work through that funnel, like I said. Jennifer, I'm trying to go through my 50,000 windows here. What was the effective date of the high density moratorium?
It was August 30th, and so, and it
Okay.
does expire in March, like I think it expires March 1st, so it might be a little bit less, I think, when we noticed it, but I have a feeling we're gonna have to extend it a little bit.
Yeah, so that kind of is, I don't know, I'm somewhere between wondering and worried that if we include all housing as part of this discussion, it's going to be too much for us to boil down and we're going to run up against the clock with the 6-month moratorium. And we certainly can extend it, but we've got to be able to say that there's some rationale behind it. And we already know there are people that are following the moratorium, so we don't just want to push it out arbitrarily. It'd be better for everybody to get something on the books that's better sooner.
Yeah.
So you would know better than me. I just want to make sure that if we start talking about small lot, single family, that we don't create a conversation that's a lot larger and we're going to have to distill a lot more feedback and to ultimately adjust those regs before the end of February. I mean, we're already middle of September.
10 years to get small lot family houses on the, I want it on the front of the agenda, not in the back. We may not have high density. That's my feeling right now after waiting 10 years.
So is there a way to establish need in any objective way?
So let's see. So one of the things.
And I know that's very,
No,
Well,
that's a
no,
good question.
That's a good
it's a
question.
good question.
We have an answer.
Yes.
So as part of the Northwest Mansfield Vision and Strategy plan, we are in the middle of doing a market analysis
Okay.
for both housing, commercial, office. And that we just got a draft of that actually yesterday, and we're reviewing that. There's a few things, and we're gonna have a meeting with the consultant. They're a sub of FHI, and it's interesting what they've come up with. It's not, they're, the high level read. I just read the executive summary, and Jillian has as well, is that we're needing housing for seniors and people over, like
35 to 54.
so basically
And
over
condos.
over 35, basically over 35, because 35 to 54 and then some seniors. So, and they're saying that, there's going to be people who are in their kind of prime earning years that are going to come to Mansfield. So they, that's what we want to see. So there's always going to be that market for student housing, but if you talk with the university, if you look at like the enrollment cliff, if you look at what's happening in higher ed, there are going to be less students going to college. So that said, that will be our market analysis. I think, any other developer would come and say, well, obviously we've done our own market analysis, but now we're going to have our own data. So I think we should use that data to inform the regs.
I think one thing that'll happen is after we get a few of these projects built, the extreme desire to build student type
Yeah, I think
housing
that's
is gonna
end,
disappear, yeah.
Cause there's a limit to how much
Yeah.
that you need.
And we need to find someplace in town for Michael to live.
Yes.
It's fine.
His timing is perfect in the market.
Michael has his own condo. It's 4 South Eagleville Road.
He needs a window though. If he's gonna live a little egress.
So I think that we can basically do a revision to what you're looking at, which is really not a, you know, like a final finished product, more of just putting thoughts on paper about what this would look like. But I think we can adjust this a little bit to broaden the scope of the discussion and then modify some of these guiding questions so that they apply more generally, so to include housing as a topic overall. And then I think the next step would be to figure out how to slot this in after the FHI meeting. So we'll have this ready to go. And then once that schedule gets sort of established, we can figure out how to get this scheduled and how to make sure that we are engaging with all of the various important folks so that we get some good feedback. But we can tweak this a little bit to reflect that moving forward, every document will have the word small lot zoning, single family zoning on the front of the agenda for Paul.
However we call it, I think we almost need like a picture, because my version of high density is probably different than other people's version. My version of small lot single family is probably different than, so I think we have to like have a picture that we're associating
Yep.
with
I think
this.
you're
And we
right.
can't use the middle housing picture because that has become toxic.
Right.
I think so, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and the other thing I wanted to talk to Mike and this group about is that we are going to be, as part of the Northwest Mansfield plan, we are doing a survey. And I think that some of these questions actually with an associated picture belong in that survey. And while this is just going to relate to Northwest Mansfield, I mean, I think it's, I do think whatever happens in Northwest Mansfield is
It's
going
a
to be
pretty-
very relevant to
Yeah.
the rest of the town.
I
mean,
think it's a
we can-
unique subset. So,
we can sort of extrapolate,
yeah,
I think. So,
So another guiding question could be, what role do small lot family homes have in
And
Mansfield?
your answer would be the only role.
Yes. Or at least some, at least one. example.
Yeah, no, we can definitely get some more of that included in here for sure. And we'll pull some non-toxic photos to show what we're talking about. And we presented that to you guys a while ago when we teed up the moratorium, and we used examples from projects nearby. So we can pull some of that, and we can sort of cite in the bottom what the project is, so they'll know that it's local. People don't want to see West Coast photos and all that other stuff.
You may have seen the article, I believe it was the New York Times this weekend, of, was it small lots in Detroit? Where they're just affordable for being small. And you saw that
Yeah.
article, yeah. And so they were taking an area and putting small lots in them, and people who couldn't afford other houses were moving in, and that was accomplishing a lot without it being officially affordable. I think we can do the officially affordable houses and the non-officially affordable at the same time.
One of the things that Old Saybrook is working on, and through their affordable housing plan, is that they are taking issue with sort of this death of the starter home. Someone buys a lot and then they put every square foot of house on it they can and turn a small cape into this big mansion. So I don't know if they actually went through that. I'd have to follow up, but they were considering it in some zones, capping the total size of a home, because their thought is, if we can cap how big it is, we can cap how much it'll sell for, and we'll start to create some entry level housing stock. We can't set minimums, but you can absolutely cap.
That's interesting, yeah.
Mike, is the tall end market analysis, is that public yet?
I think that when I looked last week, it was just being, it was being reviewed by the EDC for final approval. So the document itself is done. They're just going through and showing it to the various, groups. So if it's not already, I expect it will be in the, in the next couple of days.
Oh, great, thank you.
And the long and short of it was multifamily housing is a really good way to address your sort of upcoming declining population issues, and use that as a mechanism to further diversify people that live in your town, so that as you have people leave and you have maybe stagnant grand list growth from commercial development or other things, this is an option to sort of counterweight some of the other things which demographics show your town, like every other town, are going to be facing. But I'll share that as soon as it's public.
Paul, I think Vera has a question.
Yes, Vera, sorry.
Yeah, and this is regarding the 5th item on the guiding questions list. I don't know if I'm off base, could very well be. But if we take the fee in lieu, the danger is, of course, we don't ever get something billed. I don't know how that works. But it seems if we could take the fee in lieu, make it 20% of the housing, then they would be glad, the developer would be glad not to have to pay money forever vetting the affordable housing leases. So I was just wondering how that would fly.
20% of what?
Of their, we now have 15% of their units have to be affordable housing, right? So
Yeah.
why don't we increase it to 20?
Yeah, because you might just not get any development at all.
I don't know about that. It's not, they're gonna have to monitor this for the rest of their tenure with
Yeah.
the project.
Why they wouldn't build it.
So are you wondering, are you wanting?
I'm wondering, with the fee in lieu, does that just stall it? I mean, you know how these things go. We don't get them billed. I mean,
Well, at the moment, our fee in lieu is unusually low compared to the 15. So right now we're providing an incentive.
To not build.
So we need to discuss whether the fee in lieu percentage is high enough, because we didn't
Right.
change that when we went from 10 to 15. So maybe the first thing we should do is have the fee in lieu catch up to the 15 before we start talking about 20.
Yeah, there's two things that we're sort of bouncing between. It's the number of units within a development that are restricted, and then the cost per unit that they pay. And I think generally speaking, if they're choosing to pay the fee, then that means your fee's too low, because they're going to do what makes most sense financially. The other thing you don't want to do is make that whole process so completely restrictive. Well, I guess in some cases it's probably okay, but if you make it too restrictive, then they just go full 8-30G, and then they don't come to you at all. So you want to have that middle ground so that you still have the ability to review where they go, how big they are, what they look like, and create those units.
Outlier in Connecticut.
What was that?
15 is more common in other towns, not 20. 20 would be on the high side.
If you're doing, because 30% Vera is what pushes someone into an 830G.
yeah, I know that. Yeah.
So I think that's, when you all discuss this, I think that's why you landed on 15%.
But as a first step, let's get the fee in lieu up because we didn't adjust that at the same time.
And our Affordable Housing Committee has done a lot of work.
Yeah.
And done some really good equations and everything. Courtesy of Micah Corsi.
Who is decided on the fee in lieu instead of the housing?
So right now,
Just the standard, right?
the standard, they put in 10% of their units as deed restricted, and then they got a density bonus for adding more affordable units. And so they paid the fee in lieu for that density bonus. Do you know what I'm saying?
So
And then
it
now the
happened
hub
now.
is coming in with just purely a fee in lieu. So there'll be no on-site units on that one.
And which one?
The hub, which is,
Oh,
Pig Hill
okay.
Road.
down there, basically
And
dorm
we
time.
have
but
no,
the-
we really have no control over, they make the choice, right?
Nope. You have to, you can decide, you need to decide on a case-by-case basis. And you will have to document in the record whether or not they meet these criteria. In
Four
the
conditions.
4 conditions.
that allow
So
them to pay the fee.
The
Okay.
one between the standard and the restaurant, I've forgotten what they call it. That one they
the
offered,
villages,
they offered
Oh, I know what- I know
the
what it is.
apartments also. the
the
affordable apartments.
497, the golf course and the one by Toast at Four Corners, they're gonna be on-site only.
So they meet all their percentages with on-site housing.
No fee in lieu. So the idea that the fee in lieu is low enough to get them to use fee in lieu instead of housing may not be true.
Well,
May have been other motivations.
they were advised strongly that, because when you enacted this 15%, you realized that there were some guidelines in the regs that you had discretion as to whether or not you were going to accept that fee in lieu. So when staff advised them, I said that it's very unlikely that you will meet these requirements. So I strongly suggest you to build them on site.
They were encouraged, strongly encouraged to do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Voluntold, if you will.
Would we continue to strongly encourage them if you adjusted the fee in lieu?
Yeah.
Because
But we,
I personally believe that if the town reconsidered this whole thing, the fee in lieu may be the better way to go.
Why is that?
because of getting some money for projects.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we would use the
Yeah.
money intelligently.
There's the problem.
It's not impossible, but yeah, it's
It
possible.
would be, we would need the assistance of the town council
Yeah.
to do the right thing.
So we don't get bogged down in fee and lieu and all this stuff, because that's gonna be part of this process. Because I know Mike's, I want to be conscious of Mike D'Amato's time, but Mr. Chair, I think you have a question from Mike Stankoff.
Let me clarify,
Yes.
Bill, before you do that, I wasn't suggesting that the town council would do the wrong thing.
Okay,
I'm
right.
just suggesting
Right.
that they would have to be encouraged with a plan,
Duly noted.
okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thing that I have been dwelling on a lot with regards to our high density housing discussion and things we have heard repeatedly from the community and things that I have also heard, but I don't think voiced, is the fact that we get an awful lot of people who come in and say, we're building in the architectural style of the New England
Oh, yeah.
vernacular.
Oh,
Yeah.
And none of these are historical
No.
New England vernacular. We're not getting anything that looks like a colonial. We're not getting anything that looks like a Georgian or a Cape Cod or a Victorian. We're not getting anything that looks like a pole barn. We're not getting anything that looks like it belongs to the New England landscape. And I recognize that that is kind of form-based when we ask for those things. But it rankles me to have professionals say that and not explain what they mean, and for people to accurately say, that doesn't look like anything around here, but then it just kind of hangs in the air and we all move on.
Right.
If that is something we want to address, I think this is a time to address it. I don't know the complexities of that. I'm sure Mike D'Amato can speak to form-based codes and what we're
So
looking
that's
for there.
part of our form-based code. Yeah.
But it's been on my mind a lot, particularly when it was brought up at the public hearing last Monday by one of the folks who was speaking about the villages and had several questions, and I haven't been able to get it out of my head. I just think it's relevant to discuss here.
Yeah. I agree with you that I don't see anything New England-ish about that, but
It's only New England because we built a whole bunch of them, or there's a whole bunch of them that are about to pop up, and this town is in New England.
We gave them samples of what we liked and all they did was give it back to us. So we need to give them better examples of what we like.
And then when they don't say it, we say, what do you mean? Part of it is holding the line on our regulations and what we want, that's.
But what Greg just mentioned, maybe the samples we gave them, we should give them some different samples.
Yeah,
We don't want it to look like downtown Willimantic, do we? Those 3-story historic buildings?
I don't know.
They're not sure, I mean,
They look pretty nice.
I don't mind this
So-
business.
Okay, maybe we do.
Coffee one is really nice.
I know there, it depends.
So take away all the nice little facades and stuff they put on the buildings that they're showing us now, and that's what you get from the old days, right?
I wouldn't mind stuff that looks like Seattle in 2023. Anything but what's being called New England vernacular.
Bring us some examples.
Me?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
Sure.
good idea.
Yeah, I don't actually.
Someone
I know what they mean. by that.
Frankly, I thought of all the things that we have seen and all the things that I reviewed. I think that the mansion style houses at 497 were the most similar to the things we were asking for. They looked like big colonials. Now you can't see it as the first thing that happens when you come around the corner, as was pointed out and discussed ad nauseum by many individuals, but that kind of thing is far more in line of, okay, I could see that as a big colonial. It doesn't break up the idea of these things. You know, I'll do some research.
Thank you.
Take a field trip, drive
Sure.
around Connecticut,
You're in
Okay.
Seattle, right?
go to Boston.
Seattle, yeah,
yeah,
great stuff in Seattle.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a budget for that, for you to go to Seattle and check out historic homes. Paul will go with you as your chaperone.
Okay. I'll take pictures. I go there often.
You'll do the pictures.
yeah, this is what I grew up in my 20s and 30s living in,
That's beautiful.
those
Oh,
kinds
okay.
of places.
Mhm.
I lived in probably 4 of them. In Vermont, Dover, New Hampshire, and Boston.
Those are nice.
Yeah, I like them. And I loved living in them. They were just the greatest. It was just a really fun. There were 3 families and yeah, so
Little dormers and little
Mhm.
nooks
Yeah.
underneath
yeah.
them.
You know, a couple different patios or various places you can step out, and it's beautiful.
It would be nice.
All right, so where are we going here?
I just want some food for thought. So the easiest way to control how things look is not to create a whole design review board and 150 pages of form-based codes, because those are incredibly hard to implement and don't work very well for redevelopment, and you have enough regulation here. But the more you have a lot of discretion when you use things like development districts. And so something that I have been thinking about over and over and over and over and over again is, if the current setup, if there's a way, or if we should be simplifying all of this to create some type of, for lack of a better word, high density housing development district that has specific parameters. Maybe there are sub districts, I don't know, but the idea is you can essentially choose to deny the siting of a development district because you think the sky is green. It is completely discretionary, which means you have the ultimate leverage. And so if the commission is willing to have those tough conversations and really draw the line and say, this is what we want, we told you what we want, you brought back exactly what you asked for the first time, and so our answer is no. If you're willing to go that route, the development district gives you complete discretion. And the benefit to them is, if they give you what you're asking for, the second step in the process should be very quick and simple, because you've already defined the expectations on both sides of the table, and there shouldn't be questions. It eliminates risk. So something like that really puts you in the driver's seat, and could simplify a lot of this, because you get to be much more picky about when you're going to allow someone to drop that on a parcel. And you don't.
Isn't it the floating?
It's kind of like the
zone?
mixed use center transition.
Okay.
Is it the same concept as that, Mike, but it's more like, so the mixed use center transition is a type of zone. Whether those rules make sense for that location would be up to you to decide, like you did.
Can a district include houses that are already there?
You could, when you create it, drop it down on parcels that you think are already conforming to it. So if you created a development district for blue houses, you could drop it down on houses that were already blue if they met all those criteria, sure.
We drop it down on non-conforming houses.
You can't create a nonconformity, so we'd have to look at that, but it's not out of the question.
Could we create a district, hunting lodge district? And
I don't
have,
know,
and
I don't
have,
know what,
What would it look like?
and have zoning, which is not necessarily what there is now, a different zoning.
well, if it was going to be in a specific area of town, then I mean, you may as well consider if that's just a zone change or dropping a traditional zone on an area, but the development district would be very specific to a type of project. And so you're saying, these are the criteria, this is what we expect it to look like, this is how it will be designed. It's up to you to prove to us that your project meets those criteria, and we'll determine if we're going to allow you to apply it to the parcel.
So it has to be an undeveloped piece of land.
No.
No.
Nope.
I'd like to point out something. Can you hear me? The commission chose not to have a backbone on that 497 warehouse for apartments. We should have said no to that in my mind. And so if we're going to have so much power, we better use it. So
Good point. We're developing a backbone.
we better be.
We're learning.
And I think the key really is, because the bigger this issue becomes and the more you start dealing with some of these developers, like some of those more recent projects, saying no, as you have in the past, you are potentially exposed to litigation and appeal. So you've got to make sure that your process is in lockstep. You've got to make sure that if you say no, it's for the right reasons and the record supports you saying no. So the development district gives you that discretion, which means you have a lot more latitude about what you consider in making that decision. If it's a special permit use, for example, it's an allowed use in the regs. You're simply determining if there are extra conditions and criteria that you need to drop on it so that it will fit within, the specific area, et cetera. You can't just decide the answer is no. Whereas with the development district, it's not quite as simple as I'm explaining it, but you have more discretion to say no if you don't think the project overall is appropriate.
Could we use development districts to upzone?
Well,
So upzoning is when you take a zone and increase the density that's allowed.
yeah, I mean,
A lot of properties.
Yeah.
In the Four Corners area,
Right.
497 Middle Turnpike was majorly upzoned.
Right.
the development district could facilitate the upzoning of a specific parcel, but this is a strategic type thing, right? So you wouldn't create a development district if you were trying to, if you thought it may apply to like 50 parcels. This would be targeted development of specific projects that met defined criteria. So, and I'm,
I was thinking about, 50.
50 or 15.
I mean, what if you took 50 properties that already exist, that already have houses on them, and upzoned the whole thing? We've never tried that.
Well, you don't want to, that's upzoning is,
Meaning you can get a 2-family or a 3-family
Yeah.
Yeah.
on existing 2-acre lots.
Yeah.
That's,
right, so, but you want to make sure you have design guidelines and a lot of guardrails before you just upzone something.
Right, yeah.
Paul, are you thinking Hunting Lodge Road?
I'm thinking Hunting Lodge Road, yeah.
I don't know, I would put a tiny house on an acre of my property, no problem.
Yeah.
I have a question, Mike. If we decided that Paul gets his small lot, single family, we decided to do this development district. Could it, in order to encourage the actual development of this, could we make it approvable by site plan and not special permit?
So the development district would come in as a map change. They would land it, and then the way that most of the time they're set up, the commission would approve landing of the zone on the parcel, and then they would develop the parcel in accordance with the concept plan they submitted, which could absolutely be a site plan. And so that's there's two ways to go. Some people want to get the risk done all the way up front as a developer, because then they can go to a tenant and say, we've got this in hand. Other people want to do it the opposite way, but if you allow them to establish a master plan and they drop it down, then they already have had that conversation and they've eliminated that risk. But typically it's a site plan without a special permit.
Thank you.
Well, I think this is an important discussion that we're gonna have in the next 6 months, and we certainly need input from everyone we can get it from. And this is a good draft for getting started.
Do we know anyone that's interested in building small homes? Has anyone approached us or?
No, I mean,
I had a discussion with Derek this morning about this. So I had a discussion with Derek July about this morning. And because Jillian has spoken with contractors in the area about what are the challenges of building single homes, just as a very preliminary discussion. And the biggest issue they say is, I mean, you can get profitability out of houses, but the issue is roads. Roads and our regulations for roads are extremely expensive. They're 24, the standards for roads are 24 feet wide. You need a certain amount of frontage per lot you can get. If you don't have rear lots, basically every single lot has a certain dollar value per square foot that is high. So you need to recoup that with certain lot configurations that wind up stretching back very far when you have a certain lot size, or you're building expensive, large houses with high luxury and amenity that
So
capture
we're
that
requiring a
frontage.
certain frontage, right?
Frontage requirements are a huge deal when it comes to.
So we can
road
change
costs.
frontage requirements.
Derek, we spent about 30 minutes this morning talking about this, because I had nothing better to do than ambush him and with my ideas, clearly. But the idea being, you know, if roads cost a certain amount, what was that?
Need to keep them busier.
What do we require now?
It's 24 feet wide, is
A lot.
our
No,
road.
road.
width.
Okay, but
The
there's
lot is
also the
dependent.
frontage.
RAR 90 is 200 feet
200 is, okay,
in RAR.
right.
So, you know, or the road, particularly when it comes to a small lot,
Can be 1,000.
you also have to account for the fact that these can't be septics, pretty much, unless you're using common septics, and you're probably not on well. Or if you are dropping wells, it has to be in a very smart configuration. So you're looking at, your road comes in with your water and sewer as well. You need to pay for those extensions, which can be expensive when you're building those. But overall, I mean, if you build with enough density, it becomes logical. But roads are rough. Derek said that he would consider crunching some numbers at some point on, you know, what are, based on some quick market numbers, what are the costs at certain widths, right? Because you want a road to be a certain width so that way you can get cars by with parking. You need to be able to get a fire truck in there, and fire apparatus have certain widths. There's questions about complete streets. So the town has a complete streets policy, which is great because we want to encourage people to walk and bike as well as use cars. But to do that, we also need sidewalks or bike lanes, which extends the size of your road. So there are some difficult mathematical questions to be done on how do you make roads make sense? Because someone has to pay the cost of the road in order to put in new developments that are not already on existing.
So there's a tension between, it makes sense to put 1,000 apartments because you can service them.
Yes.
And it makes sense to make one house on 5 acres. But what doesn't make sense is a small house on a small lot.
Unless it's accessing, unless you can do a driveway to a main existing street.
If you can do that, or if you can double stack with rear lots, but flag lots are not allowed everywhere. But if you can double stack with rear lots, that functionally increases how much, it decreases frontage per unit. So it becomes more profitable. If you have shared driveways, that's more profitable because you only need one driveway cut in. So again, frontage decreases, but at the same point, shared driveways are a nightmare that many property owners look to avoid because people don't like their neighbors necessarily. And if you like your neighbor, that's great. And if you don't like your neighbor, any shared agreement is a nightmare. So there's
Every person that I've known that used a shared driveway had some conflict with
Yes.
the other person.
Absolutely. So there's
100% of the time.
there are these tensions, and it's mostly in the upfront cost, right? That is the real thing. Is small lot single family can be really great, but there's an upfront cost in street expansion, which can be hard to bear for the developer. And so that was my discussion with Derek this morning, and kind of Jolene's conversation with contractors in the past. So it's not that they're impossible, it's that we have to figure out how to make it work.
Right.
And we may have to tweak our regulations and
Yes.
our road design and frontage for these lots.
That's why we're here on the reg review committee.
All right, so I have a meeting at 3:50. We've got some stuff to get through. What else do we, what do we need? I think we've talked so much about this. We've looked at so many pictures. I've looked at so many cottage style developments, and I'm just showing Bill Temeko, the pocketneighborhoods.net, you know, that website, and there's just a lot of stuff. AARP, I like look there. So there's lots of stuff. So it's just a matter of getting the community input and then writing something up, and then it won't be perfect, unfortunately. But better
At the end of the day, I think the issue is, even if we want it and we have the best regs in the country, if the market doesn't support it, we will never see it. And so I live in West Hartford. I have a little house on a little lot. My neighborhood is not what you guys are talking about when you talk about small lot, single family, right? We're talking about sort of this fancier version, I think, which has more landscaping, more green space. Houses are farther apart than what you would see on lots of that size. So with that's going to come some of those increased costs. And so we have to figure out how to make that work so that the densities make sense. You could go with private roads in lieu of public roads, but developers typically don't want to deal with that because then you have an association and that creates a whole nother hassle. And if they fail, they become the town's responsibilities anyways. I saw an analysis of some construction costs just this past week, and 100-unit residential development. This is in the same building at approximately 140,000 square feet, would have approximately $50 million construction cost. And if they sold it as soon as they constructed it, they would get just over 30 million in sale. So they're eating about $100 a square foot.
easily.
And that's a big delta. And they've got to make that delta up somehow, maybe, and you can't give them a $15 million tax break. You know, you can't make that up there. So to some extent it's the market, and we can't plan for that. We can set the regs up, and we can create incentives, and we can make it easy and uncomplicated, and we're going to do all of that. But a lot of this is things are getting really, really complicated. You know, I'm sure some of you heard about the warehouse development that we had in Willington go through whatever process about a year ago. The site costs for that development would have exceeded $40 million just for site work.
Oh my goodness.
So they're just, all of these costs, you know, the more we require and the more that has to be done, they get passed on to that user. So we have to figure out how to get those numbers down if we can. But anyways, I think my homework and the notes that I have are, we've got to do a little bit of work on the information side. We need to tweak this flyer, add some photos, and get this teed up so that after FHI has their neighborhood meeting, we can schedule this discussion, and it will include sort of housing at a more broad scale rather than just the high density apartment style.
Sounds good.
So. Okay.
Should we move on to riparian corridor?
Sure.
Works for me.
We already have a riparian corridor, right? With our,
Kind of. So.
More today. It was raining.
yeah.
That's true. You're a
So
variant.
Jolene brought up a good point, and that, you know, right now we're talking about riparian corridor zoning, but what we're going to talk about with this commission is really bringing this to the wetlands agency. So we just want to, this is not noticed as a wetlands meeting, it's noticed as a PZC meeting. So,
Okay.
but I think we can kind of talk about at high level what we're thinking, and then bring it over to either the full Inland Wetlands Agency Committee.
We'll let that agency take care of it.
Yeah.
Completely different set of feelings. So Once upon a time, I came in with a presentation that gave just kind of the high level, what do we have already? And I noted that we have this wherever feasible, 50 feet vegetative buffer from all wetlands and water courses. And then we spent a whole bunch of time, I'm not gonna call it going around in circles because we did get somewhere, but circling on how do we make this better, right? What more can we do? Because the language wherever feasible is, if you're thinking that we're not doing our job, is a weasel words to let us get out of having to enforce anything. And if you are supportive of people being able to use land, you'd say that that allows us discretion to be reasonable, where a hard cutoff would prevent us from allowing very reasonable activities from occurring within 50 feet of a wetland. The big issue that we have is that if we put into place a 50 or 100-foot no-build zone, we're gonna have people whose reasonable use of land is restricted in a way that we can't spin a release valve on. If we set up a whole bunch of regulations in the planning regs that explain what wherever feasible does, which was where I was going with this, we had a meeting with Mike D'Amato and Robin Newton, where Robin correctly pointed out, that's just the Wetlands Commission. If you do that, if you say wherever feasible, don't go near wetlands except under these circumstances, that's what the Wetlands Commission does. And that's kind of its job in the first place, is to decide, okay, are you reasonably doing things near the wetlands? So in terms of what we have now, if we want to do that, if we want to really buckle down on, okay, what does a vegetative buffer look like? And what do we want within those 50 feet? We can revise our wetlands regs in such a way.
Not revise the regs, but.
Or rather, not even revise the regs. We can just,
Need to revise this.
we can just kind of internally put applications through a more ardent review on anything within 50 feet and really demand that prudent and feasible alternatives analysis. Now, for the background on that, I recognize this is not a wetlands meeting, but this is general reg talk. You know, every application is supposed to submit some sort of prudent and feasible alternative, which means it has to be both workable in terms of engineering and have some sort of financial feasibility.
If it's deemed to have a significant impact.
Right, it's,
Right.
and if you have a significant impact, you have to show that there are none of those in order for it to be approved. Now, just because there are alternatives doesn't mean you have to say no, and so on and so forth. There's all sorts of hedge language, but if we really force people to say, okay, why do you have to do this? And we put that front and center, and why can't you do this elsewhere? Why do you have to go this close?
If you're within, so I think, can I simplify this? Mike,
Sure,
just a little bit?
go
Okay.
ahead.
I think what we're saying is that that zoning riparian corridors, when you have wetlands regulations, is challenging, right? Because so you have wetland regulations, and this really should be talked about in a wetlands meeting. However, what you could say is, you could say 50 feet, if you're going to do work within 50 feet of a wetland, that we're going to call that significant. And if it's significant, you're going to have a public hearing, and you're going to be required to provide an alternatives analysis, which means that even if it, this is going to be up to you to determine what the parameters are. But if it's a deck and you're 50 feet from a wetland, why do you have to have your deck there? You know, that might be an extreme example, but right now you are letting decks go very, very close to the wetland. So it's going to be a matter of just, you know, 50 feet is sort of your, if that's something you want to do, 50 feet could be your limit, and then you're going to require a much higher bar, and then we're going to change the application so that this prudent and feasible alternative is required, and then you know, if it were a special permit, you have to have documentation from the wetlands agency anyway, so that's going to go in the record there. So it's just kind of, we don't change the regulations and without weaseling out of this, because I know the public really wants us to see us protect our riparian corridors, we probably can achieve the same thing.
The only other idea that I have had is that we can target specific rivers for protection, right? So we have right now this, every wetland in town is protected by the Wetlands Commission, and we have our guiding principles in our design standards. But there are various relevant rivers in town that we find very, very valuable for whatever reason, that either the state has noted are natural and scenic or very high value for preservation for aquifers. We could protect those rivers with zoning, with a district over those rivers that says no within certain number of feet unless it's XYZ. Now, a lot of these already fall into our floodplains. As I've noted, in the past, floodplains are very well protected because of all the matters with insurance that go with them. In some ways, it feels, I don't want to say defeatist, but it feels weird to come all the way back around after having done all of this to say, I actually think we're protecting these rather well, and all we need to do is just put things through a little bit closer, another level of magnification under the microscope. Because there's some pretty strong regs in terms of our watercourses.
We already have pretty strong regs.
You do.
Yeah.
By defining them more, do we possibly take some prerogatives that the Wetland Commission currently has away? I mean, we sometimes it's best to be able to interpret things
Mhm.
Rather than
Mhm.
making it specific.
So, yeah. If you want to say everything within 50 feet is significant, that makes it hard to later say, well, I mean, this isn't really significant. This is such a little thing, right? This is 46 feet and it's such a little thing, right? But we do have some standards right now that say, what degree of earth movement is going to count as significant, right? So what I can do is I can put together a quick rundown of what we've got, right? It's in the regs, but I'll pull out the stuff we have. And
maybe, I'm sorry, maybe
Go.
you could take an example of a project and you could do it both ways. You could say, here is how we did it, and here is how it potentially could be done should we decide to move forward with this and do it this way, so that the members can see that it's just a sort of a shift in mindset, right?
And
That's a
what we
little-
can do is I can do that absolutely with both a big project
Yeah.
as well as one of the ones I've agent approved,
Mhm.
right? And you can see what effect this will have on both the little guy and some of the big projects.
That's a good
Such-
idea to give us some examples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think that you could put in a checkbox on your application that asks if any of the activity will be within 50 feet of, and if they check that box, then, basically to the folks that are skeptical, it's a commitment. The Wetlands Commission is making a commitment to review anything within 50 feet to determine if it's a potentially significant activity and go through that process. So the first thing is I think just being open and honest that you're going to commit to doing that, and you understand that rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and create a wetland process through the zoning regs, which we don't know to be supported anyway, you're going to use the authority you already have. The other thing is, if they're really still skeptical, planning and zoning, if they don't like the 50-foot reg, they can get a variance. You can't get a variance from the wetland regs. So if you go through this process, you have the ultimate control, and there isn't this pressure relief valve that you have no involvement in. And go to the ZBA, they can say, listen, my house is already here, I just want to do this thing. And the ZBA says, okay, fine. And they're out the door. So it vests the sole discretion of these riparian corridors solely with PZC and in the wetlands with the group effectively. So I think you stand a chance to have a far more consistent application of that process once you commit to whatever it will be. But it's a far more cohesive approach than trying to draft all of these things, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what I'm seeing this is that I think it's as simple as, is your activity within 50 feet of a wetland, yes or no? If yes, then they're held to a higher bar. And sort of, we have to describe how we came to this point, and we say, you know, I think it could be a memo. The town of Mansfield is committed to protecting its wetlands, watercourses, and riparian corridors. You know, we have flood hazard zones that stormwater regulations that promote LID, special permit requirements that, you know, force you to look at natural resources, drainage, blah, blah, blah. And then performance standards that, well, wherever that performance standards lands in you know, don't do anything within 50 feet of the wetlands, and then some guidelines. Because that is where I'm kind of thinking this should go.
I can draft that memo as it's kind of an agglomeration of everything I've done already.
Yeah, exactly. It's a summary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of as a.
And then
release
an
to the
update,
public
and then
of
we just update the application. We don't need
our
to.
commitment.
If
to
you guys,
the environment.
we bring it to the agency and we get your authority to kind of proceed with this, and then we take steps as a staff.
Okay,
So
that makes sense.
we'll put that on the wetlands agenda.
It's a much easier solution.
Yeah, it
In
is.
some ways.
In some ways. But you know, it's good to do these kinds of critical analyses. And sometimes when you come back and find out actually everything's kind of going okay, and we just need to make sure that we do the things we say we're going to do, it feels weird and it feels like a cop out. But I really do think
But
things
this
are
is
good.
Something we've heard from the public over and over, and I want to make sure that the public understands that we're really not trying to cop out here, and so there has to be some sort of clear presentation of how we got here.
So I will start working on that.
Okay. So our last item is keeping of livestock.
A prevalent theme for the planning and development office this week.
Apparently.
Yes.
And online.
My
Just-
neighbor texted me last night. Did you know this is happening?
Yeah, so just want to note that we were a working group of 3 and 1/3 of our working group is not here today. So wondering what the committee's feeling is on perhaps tabling this until we have Luann, you know, our whole working group.
Okay.
Can I ask just a question about the town ordinance that is being referred to in all of these letters? Does that apply to everything? Like if you're a resident and you have chickens, does an agriculture ordinance apply to you?
The right to farm.
The right to farm.
Yeah,
So let me,
I don't know the answer.
I was the one who actually worked on that with the ag committee to get that enacted, and I want to pull that right to farm ordinance. There's a lot of literature, like from the Connecticut Farm Bureau and Department of Agriculture. It's really a policy statement.
okay.
There's no legal teeth to it. It's
Okay.
basically saying that, you know, you're here, we are welcoming to farmers, but if you're and you know, certain things like normal smells, normal noises, slow traffic, a little bit of dust during harvest season, we're going to accept that as part of being a farming community, but it doesn't mean that you get carte blanche. And so and even if so, there's a lot of, it's not a law. It's
Okay.
yeah,
That makes
by
more
any
sense.
stretch.
In 30 seconds or less, could you tell me what you're talking about?
There's the letter from Paul Stearns refers to a right to farm ordinance. And I think maybe a couple others do,
I think they all do.
that they're using as grounds to say you can't set these kind of limits on poultry, on roosters.
So it says, so right to
Correct,
farm is
right.
notwithstanding any general statute or municipal ordinance or regulation pertaining to the nuisances. To the contrary, no agriculture, farming operation, place, establishment, or facility within the town of Mansfield or any of its appurtenance or the operation thereof shall be deemed to constitute a nuisance, either public or private. So, you know, it gets to what is an agricultural farming operation, place, or establishment or
Right.
facility, right? So, I mean, you know, and then basically it's like notwithstanding, you can't violate anything from DEEP or the public health or any other regulatory practice. So, and then, inspection and approval of the agricultural farming operation, place, establishment, or facility by the Commissioner of Agriculture or his designee shall be prima facie evidence that subject operation follows generally accepted agricultural practices. So there's a lot of wiggle room. I don't know, I mean, Mike D'Amato, maybe have stuff, but there's basically, it's, we're trying to balance being an agricultural community with some of, some people who maybe not, I don't know, may not, they may take care of their animals in a different way. So we don't want to be overbearing as a government, but at the same time, it's just finding the balance, right? I mean, I don't know. It's really hard, and it's ultimately going to be up to you all.
How did the committee come to the, what is it, 2.75 acres or?
Yep.
How did you come to that?
I'm happy to discuss with Luann here. I think
Yeah, maybe I think we're not tabling this.
Yeah.
I think maybe we should actually
I know her position. Yeah.
decide to take to table, but I guess I
We
wanted
can
to
table
get-
if you want. I just.
Yes, I think it's probably Luann should be here,
Okay.
but I did want to get,
We finally came down to that number on the suggestion of Julene because that would keep roosters out of our small subdivisions.
Okay, that's what I was.
That's
curious.
where that number came from.
Yeah, so, we looked at other towns, a lot of other towns, we did a
All the
lot of the
ones.
research. We had the animal control officer in to talk about some of the issues that she sees. And I think that I haven't seen the social media post, but there was a social media post. And the word ban came up, and I don't think we banned roosters. We did say they were not permitted as of right on lots less than 120,000 square feet.
I don't know if we've even gone that far yet.
Yep, we said
Yep.
0 on lots less than
Oh.
120,000 square feet,
right,
but then we said, listen, if you want to come in and ask for a zoning permit to get one, on less, we would consider it. I have
So-
not had a chance to run that by Mike D'Amato yet, which is something I want to do.
Right.
But I think ban, that was not our intent. Would you agree?
Right.
I think it was just more guardrails, right? If someone is
If
causing
someone
a
had a,
nuisance, then, yeah,
if
so.
someone had a lot less than 120,000 square feet. And maybe they have 1 acre that's hidden up on a little side street or something. We wanted to provide a mechanism for them to be able to go to planning and zoning and go, look, it's only 1 acre, but I don't have many neighbors around me and all this. Can I have a rooster? And that's why, as long as that guardrail was built in, we felt that was where we would present it to the next step, to the next group.
Yep.
Online, the letters that we got in our packets are the sanitized versions of what they wrote online, in which we've been called un-American commie hacks for even that is, I had to look up that quote for even talking about, and a lot of the letters are in support of the sound of roosters. Some people said they found them calming and everything. So, and lastly, there's in these letters that are not sanitized, they seem to be alluding to that this is a person complaining that's connected with the city and this is being done to appease them. And they felt that we should not be, I don't know the town politics, but they said that we should not be trying to appease this one person in the face of all the other community that supports the right to farm.
Did we make a problem where no problem existed?
I think we did.
And I think it's important to say the regs don't have to be changed at all. We have regs, we enforce them as best we can, and they do not have to be changed if the commission so chooses.
If we were to continue, roosters aren't in our verbiage at all. If we left it that way, would we consider that a failure by the committee? If we didn't address the roosters at all? If we just,
I don't think it's a failure. I think we
It's-
researched it and
Kind of
it-
like that.
And I also think you want to make sure you have an agriculture committee
Yeah.
that just presented to the the council last night with a bunch of different farmers. I think you want to hear from,
Yep.
that's your past practice.
Did they weigh in on this?
Not
Not
yet.
yet, yeah, you're waiting for working group to be done.
And that's lovely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I emailed you the red card, but I.
Okay,
Are we all leaving or just Jennifer?
I think we're adjourned.
we're adjourned.
There's nothing else on the.
Nothing else on the agenda, so we're adjourned at 3:15.
Good to see you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.